The rag hit the marble floor with a wet slap, and Nora Callahan did not look up. 10 women in white silk dresses stood in the reflection of the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her, their heels clicking against glass so clean it looked like water, and none of them noticed the woman on her knees polishing the base of a 200-year-old Italian sculpture, until one of them nearly stepped on her hand. "Watch it," Nora said, not unkindly, just tired, and the woman in white barely glanced down before continuing her conversation about lighting angles and camera blocking. Nora was 28 years old, and she had been cleaning the top 3 floors of the Vitale Group tower for 14 months, and in that time she had learned exactly one rule that mattered above all others. Do not be seen. Not by the executives, not by the security detail that moved like shadows through the hallways, and especially not by the man whose name was on the building. But that Tuesday, the rule broke itself. The elevator chimed, and the room went silent the way rooms did when Marco Vitale entered them, not because anyone announced him, but because the air itself seemed to reorganize around his presence. Nora had seen him twice before in 14 months, both times from a distance, both times gone before she'd finished processing that she was in the same room as him. This time he stopped 6 feet from where she knelt. He was studying the 10 women lined up for him like they were a menu he had not ordered, his dark eyes moving from face to face with the flat patience of a man counting something he already suspected would come up short. His suit was navy, cut so precisely it looked poured rather than sewn, and his hands were folded in front of him, still, the way a held breath is still. On his right hand, a signet ring caught the light. Gold, worn smooth at the edges, older than he was. "Which one of you," he said, his voice low and unhurried, "can tell me something true about herself that isn't in the portfolio?" The women exchanged glances. One laughed, uncertain. Another began a rehearsed answer about her modeling philosophy, and Marco held up 2 fingers, and she stopped talking mid-sentence. That was when his eyes moved past all 10 of them and landed on Nora, still on her knees with a rag in her hand, wax residue drying on her fingers, invisible until she wasn't. "You," he said. "What's true about you?" Nora's whole body went cold, then hot, then very still, the way a person goes still when a predator has noticed them, and running would only confirm they were prey. She sat back on her heels and looked up at him, because looking away felt more dangerous than looking at him directly. "I'm not part of this," she said. "I clean the floors." "I didn't ask what you do," Marco said. "I asked what's true." The 10 models in white silk were staring now, and one of them, a tall woman with a jaw like a blade whose name tag read Vivian, made a small sound of disbelief in her throat, as if the question itself was an insult to the room she'd paid a stylist to prepare her for. Nora set the rag down on the floor beside her, deliberately, and stood, because she was not going to answer a man like this from her knees. "True is that I've worked here 14 months, and you've walked past me 100 times and never seen me until right now," she said. "True is that whatever answer you're looking for from them, you already know they're going to lie to get it. And true is that I have 3 more floors to finish before 6, so if you don't need anything else from me, Mr. Vitale, I'd like to get back to work." The silence that followed had weight to it, the specific gravity of a silence in a room full of people who were used to being the most interesting thing in it, suddenly displaced. Marco did not smile. He did not do anything with his face at all, but something behind his eyes shifted, recalibrated, the way a man recalculates a chess position after an opponent moves a piece he hadn't accounted for. "What's your name?" he said. "Nora." "Nora what?" "Callahan." He held her gaze for a beat longer than comfort allowed, then turned back to the 10 women in white and dismissed all of them with 4 words that emptied the room faster than any of them had arrived in it. "This isn't what I need." Nora picked her rag back up off the floor and went back to the base of the sculpture, and she told herself, hands shaking only slightly, that this was the end of it. A strange 5 minutes in an otherwise ordinary Tuesday, nothing more. She was wrong, and she would understand exactly how wrong 3 days later, when security stopped her at the elevator bank and told her Mr. Vitali wanted to see her in his office, alone, immediately. The elevator ride to the 40th floor took 11 seconds and felt like 11 minutes. Nora had cleaned executive offices for over a year, had wiped down surfaces where deals worth more than her lifetime salary had been signed, and she had never once been summoned to sit inside one of them. Marco's office took up the entire northeast corner of the building, glass on 2 sides, the city laid out beneath it like something conquered. He stood at the window when she entered, his back to her, and for a moment she thought this might be a mistake, that she had been called up here by accident, that some assistant had confused Nora Callahan, the cleaner, with someone else entirely. "Sit," he said, without turning around. She sat. He turned then and studied her the way he had studied the 10 women 3 days earlier, except this time there was no menu quality to it, no comparison happening behind his eyes. He was simply looking at her, and it made her want to look at the floor, and she did not let herself. "I had 10 women in this office who spent 6 months preparing to be seen by me," he said. "You spent 30 seconds telling me the truth without trying." "I wasn't trying to impress you," Nora said. "I was trying to finish my shift." "I know." Something in his mouth almost moved. "That's the thing." He walked to his desk and picked up a folder and set it down in front of her without opening it. "I run a legitimate import business through this building. Wine, olive oil, textiles from 3 regions in Italy." He paused. "Some of what happens in this building is not that. I assume you already know this?" Nora's stomach dropped, because she did know it, had known it for 14 months the way everyone who cleaned this building at night knew it, in the careful way people know things they've decided not to think about too hard because their rent is due on the 1st. "I clean floors," she said again, carefully. "I don't ask questions about what happens on them." "That's exactly why I need you," Marco said. He told her, in a voice that did not rise or fall, that someone inside this building had been feeding information to a rival family for 6 months, that 3 shipments had been intercepted with a precision that meant someone with access to schedules, someone who moved through these floors invisibly, was the source, that he needed someone in every room, unnoticed, who could tell him who did not belong where they claimed to be. "You want me to spy for you," Nora said. "I want you to keep doing exactly what you already do," Marco said. "Notice things. Tell me what you notice." "And if I say no?" For the first time, something like respect crossed his face. "Then you clean the floors and none of this happened. You walk out of here and I never call you back up." Nora sat with that for a long moment. The offer and the exit both laid out in front of her plainly, no threat behind either one, which somehow made it worse, because a threat would have been easier to refuse. She thought about her mother's medical bills. She thought about the fact that she was already inside this, had been inside it the moment he asked her what was true, and she'd told him. She thought about the way his eyes had found her across a room full of women built to be found, and something in her, something she did not examine too closely, wanted to know why. "I'm not a spy," she said, "but I clean this whole building. I see things. If I tell you something, it's because it's true, not because you're paying me to say it." "That's all I want," Marco said. That was the moment everything changed, though Nora would not understand the full shape of that change for weeks, would only feel the floor tilt slightly beneath her, the way a person feels a ship shift before they understand the sea has turned. Over the following 2 weeks, Nora noticed things she had trained herself not to notice for 14 months. She noticed that the executive assistant on the 38th floor, a man named Damon Reyes, worked later than everyone else, and that his trash never contained the shredded documents everyone else's did. She noticed that his badge logged him into the server room twice in 1 week, though his job title gave him no reason to be there once. She told Marco these things in 5-minute conversations that happened after hours, in his office, with the door closed, and each time she found herself staying a minute longer than the information required. He never touched her. He never said anything that could be mistaken for interest beyond the practical. But he started remembering things about her that she hadn't told him twice. That she took her coffee black. That she favored the north stairwell over the elevator because it let her avoid the lobby cameras that made her feel watched even when she'd done nothing wrong. He said her name differently than the executives who barely acknowledged her existence did. Slower, like he was giving it weight it had never been given before. "You're not what I expected," he told her one night, standing at the window with the city behind him, 3 weeks into the arrangement. "What did you expect?" "Someone who wanted something from me." He turned to face her. "You haven't asked me for anything." "I don't want anything from you," Nora said, and it was true when she said it, and she watched something in his expression register that truth like it was rare currency, which, in his world, it probably was. Therefore, because she had proven herself useful and honest in the same breath, he began to trust her with more than observation. He began to trust her with proximity. He asked her to stay after her shift ended, not to clean, but to sit in the corner of meetings where his own men might slip and say something they wouldn't say in front of an obvious insider. She became furniture in rooms that mattered, and furniture, she learned, heard everything. It was in one of those rooms, 4 weeks into the arrangement, that she heard Damon Reyes's name mentioned by someone else entirely, an underboss named Salvatore, who did not know she was listening, and the sentence he said made her blood run cold enough that she had to grip the handle of her cleaning cart to keep her hands from shaking. "Reyes isn't the leak," Salvatore said, low, to another man in the room. "He's the distraction. The real leak is someone Marco would never suspect, someone who cleans up after everyone and never gets looked at twice." Nora did not move. She did not breathe differently. She finished wiping down the conference table like she had heard nothing at all, and when the men left the room, she stood there for a long time, with her hand pressed flat against the cold glass, understanding with terrible clarity that Salvatore had just described her, or someone exactly like her, and that whoever the real leak was, they had chosen their cover the same way she had accidentally built hers. She told Marco that night, every word, exactly as she'd heard it. He listened without interrupting, his jaw tightening by degrees as she spoke, and when she finished, he was quiet for so long she thought she'd said something wrong. "You understand what you just did," he said finally. "I told you what I heard." "You told me that someone in this building wants me to suspect the person closest to me right now," he said, "which means either Salvatore is protecting the real leak by pointing at a shape that could be you, or Salvatore is the leak, and he's trying to make me distrust the one person who's actually been honest with me. Which do you think it is?" Marco crossed the room and stood closer to her than he ever had, close enough that she could smell the cedar note in his cologne beneath something sharper, something like the ozone smell before a storm breaks. "I think," he said, "that I have known Salvatore for 20 years, and I have known you for 6 weeks, and I trust you more." The confession, when it came, was not romantic. It was not soft. It was simply true, delivered the way he delivered every truth, without decoration, and it landed in Nora's chest with more force than any declaration she'd ever heard in her life, because she understood exactly what it cost a man like Marco Vitali to say it out loud. She stayed. That was the answer she gave him, though she gave it without words. He told her to be careful going forward, that Salvatore might be watching her now too, and she did not leave the room, did not put distance between herself and a man who had just told her he trusted her more than a 2-decade loyalty. She stood there, and he did not ask her to explain the staying, and she did not offer to. Therefore, because that trust had been spoken aloud and neither of them had taken it back, the ground between them shifted into territory that could not be walked back from easily. It was 2 nights later that Nora found the ledger. She had not been looking for it. She had been cleaning the executive lounge on the 39th floor, running her cart along the back hallway that most employees forgot existed, when she noticed a supply closet door slightly ajar that was always locked. Curiosity, or maybe instinct honed by 5 weeks of being asked to notice things, made her push it open. Inside, taped beneath the bottom shelf where no cleaning supply had ever needed to go, was a small black notebook, and when she opened it with fingers that had gone numb, she found columns of numbers next to dates next to what she recognized from weeks of overheard conversation as shipment codes. Shipment codes that matched 3 intercepted deliveries Marco had mentioned to her by number weeks ago in passing. The handwriting was not Damon Reyes's. She had seen his handwriting on inventory sheets a dozen times. This was smaller, more precise, almost architectural in its neatness. It was Salvatore's. Nora stood in that closet for nearly 10 minutes, the notebook heavy in her hands, understanding that she was holding something that could end a man's life, could end it that same night if she brought it to Marco, and understanding too that once she carried it out of this closet, there would be no version of her existence in this building that looked like it had before. She would not be furniture anymore. She would be a woman who had chosen a side in a war that killed people for less than what she was holding. She thought about walking away, about putting the notebook back and finishing her shift and pretending the closet door had been locked after all. She did not do that. She was, whatever else she had become in 6 weeks, not someone who put evil back on a shelf and closed the door on it. She took the notebook to Marco's office. He read it standing up, his face doing something Nora had never seen it do before, a controlled violence moving beneath the stillness like water under ice. When he finished, he closed it slowly and set it on the desk with the exact careful precision of a man setting down something that could detonate if handled wrong. Salvatore vouched for 2 men currently inside this family, he said, his voice very quiet. Both of them are dead men the moment I confirm this. Marco. It was the first time she had used his first name without a title in front of it, and she watched it land on him differently than she expected. Watched something crack slightly in the controlled surface of him. This isn't just information anymore. If he finds out I found this, he'll come for me. He won't get close to you, Marco said, and for the first time, there was heat in his voice, something that was not calculation, something that sounded almost like fear wearing the mask of certainty. I will burn this entire building down before I let that happen. But he was wrong about how much time they had, and Nora understood that the moment her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number that simply read, "We need to talk about what you took from the closet." And she felt the floor of her ordinary world, whatever remained of it, finally give way completely. That was the moment everything Nora thought she understood about staying safe collapsed, because Salvatore already knew, and a man who had spent 20 years inside an organization built on violence did not send a polite text message unless he intended for it to be the last warning she received before something worse arrived. She showed Marco the message with hands that would not stop trembling, and something in his face went past anger into a stillness that frightened her more than rage would have, because rage was loud, and this was the silence right before a door closes for the last time. "You're not staying in this building tonight," he said. "You're not staying anywhere he knows to look." I have an apartment, Marco. I have a life outside of your war. Not anymore, you don't, he said, and it wasn't cruelty in his voice. It was the flat certainty of a man who had watched people he loved disappear before and refused to watch it happen again. My brother trusted the wrong man for 11 years, and it got him killed in a parking garage 2 blocks from where he grew up. I am not doing that again. Not with you. It was the first time he had spoken of his brother directly, and Nora understood, in the space of that single sentence, the entire architecture of the wound he carried. The reason his hands went still instead of shaking. The reason he trusted almost no one and had somehow, against every rule he'd built his life around, trusted her. She did not argue further. She let him move her that night to a safe house 2 boroughs away, a modest brownstone with reinforced windows and 2 men stationed outside who did not ask questions. And she sat in an unfamiliar living room at 11 at night with a cup of coffee going cold in her hands. And she understood that she had crossed a line somewhere in the last 6 weeks that could not be uncrossed. A line between the ordinary world where she cleaned floors and cashed a paycheck and this one, where a man's brother had died because trust had gone to the wrong person. And now that same man had chosen to trust her instead. Marco came to the safe house himself near midnight, against the advice of the 2 men outside, and when he walked through the door, his eyes went to her first, checking, cataloging that she was whole and unharmed, before he said a single word to anyone else in the room. Salvatore is not going to stop, he told her, once the room had cleared. Men like him do not stop because they've been discovered. They accelerate. So what happens now? Now, Marco said, sitting across from her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion beneath the composure. The first crack of a man who had been holding every piece of this together with his bare hands. I end it before he gets the chance to come for you directly. That is the only version of tomorrow I am willing to accept. Nora studied him for a long moment, this man who had built an empire out of stillness and violence and quiet, unbreakable certainty, and who was sitting in front of her now with something in his eyes that looked, for the first time since she had met him, uncertain. I want to help, she said. No. You don't get to say no to that. Her voice came out harder than she expected, steadier too. I'm the one who found the notebook. I'm the one he threatened. I am already in this, Marco, whether you want me to be or not. And I would rather be in it with a plan than sitting in a safe house waiting to find out if your plan worked. Something in him wanted to refuse her again. She could see it in the set of his jaw. The old instinct to protect by removing rather than including. But he did not refuse. He looked at her the way he had looked at her that very first day, across a room full of women who had prepared for months to be seen and failed. And she had been seen without trying at all. Therefore, he said, and the corner of his mouth almost moved, you should know exactly what tomorrow is going to look like. He explained it to her in careful detail. A sit-down had been called, forced by Marco himself before Salvatore could organize his own move, at a restaurant in a neutral district where old rules of conduct still meant something even to men who broke every other rule that existed. Salvatore would not expect to be exposed there, in front of witnesses from 3 families, would assume Marco intended a private conversation rather than a public reckoning. But he'll have men there, Nora said. He won't walk in alone. No, which is why I need someone in that restaurant who does not look like anyone in my organization, who can move through the room the way you have moved through my entire building for 14 months, unnoticed. Nora understood exactly what he was asking, and the weight of it settled into her chest, heavy and clarifying at once. You want me there. I want you safe, Marco said. But I have learned in 6 weeks that you do not do safe well when someone you care about is in danger. So yes, I want you there, in a position that keeps you protected, watching an exit I cannot watch myself, while I sit across from a man who helped raise me in this life, and who has been selling pieces of it out from under me for months. The restaurant, the following evening, smelled of garlic and candle wax and old wood polished by decades of hands, and Nora stood near the kitchen entrance in a plain black dress that made her invisible among the waitstaff, exactly as planned, her heart beating so hard she was certain someone would hear it over the low murmur of conversation filling the room. Salvatore sat across from Marco at a corner table, flanked by 2 men Nora recognized from the tower, his composure immaculate, his hands folded on the white tablecloth in a mirror of the stillness Marco himself always wore, as if he had learned it from the same source and never stopped performing it. "You wanted to talk," Salvatore said, his voice carrying just far enough for Nora to catch it from her position by the kitchen door. "So talk." Marco set the black notebook on the table between them, and Salvatore's composure did not break, not visibly, but Nora, who had spent 14 months learning to read rooms other people ignored, saw the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes, the flicker of a man recalculating an escape he had not planned for. 20 years, Marco said. I trusted you with everything. My brother's memory, my father's territory, my life, more times than I can count. Marco. Salvatore's voice had gone careful now, measured in a different way, the measure of a man choosing his next words like they might be his last. Whatever you think you found, it isn't what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like, Marco said. You sold 3 shipments to men who would have used the money to put a bullet in me the moment it was convenient. You let a woman who works for me get threatened because she was smarter than you expected her to be. At the mention of her, Salvatore's eyes moved across the room, scanning, and Nora felt the exact moment his gaze found her by the kitchen door, felt the calculation happen behind his expression, the sudden understanding that she was not simply staff, that she was the reason his careful architecture had collapsed. He moved fast, faster than a man his age should have been able to move, his hand going beneath the table, and Nora did not wait to see what came up in it. She grabbed the tray of water glasses from the waiter passing beside her and threw it, hard, directly into the space between Salvatore and the 2 men flanking him, glass shattering across the table and the floor in a violent crash that sent half the restaurant to its feet and, more importantly, broke the single second of aim Salvatore needed to level whatever he was reaching for. Marco moved in that same second, closing the distance across the small table before Salvatore's men could react, his hand closing around Salvatore's wrist with a precision that looked almost gentle from a distance, and was, Nora understood immediately, anything but. The gun clattered to the floor. One of Salvatore's men reached for his own weapon and found himself facing 2 of Marco's people who had been seated at the bar the entire time, unremarkable, invisible, exactly the way Nora herself had learned to be invisible in rooms that mattered. The restaurant held its breath collectively, and in that suspended moment, Nora stepped forward from the kitchen doorway, not because Marco needed her to, not because the plan required it, but because she was done standing at the edges of a story that had already made her a participant. He'll run if you let him think there's an opening, she said, loud enough for the room, and Salvatore's eyes cut to her again, and this time there was something like recognition in them, the specific fury of a man who has just understood that the person who ended him was someone he never bothered to see. You, he said, low, poisonous. The cleaner. The witness, Nora corrected him, and did not look away. Marco's grip on Salvatore's wrist tightened until something in the older man's face registered actual pain, and his voice, when he spoke next, carried a finality that closed every remaining door in the room. 20 years, Marco said again, quieter this time, almost gentle, which made it worse. You could have come to me. You could have told me you needed more. Instead, you decided my brother's death meant nothing, that everything I built meant nothing, and you nearly cost me the one thing in 6 years I have wanted to keep. He said the last part looking at Nora, and something passed between them that the entire restaurant could see, something that made Salvatore's expression twist with a final, bitter understanding of exactly how thoroughly he had misjudged the shape of his own downfall. What happened to Salvatore after that, Nora did not witness directly, and Marco did not describe it to her later. She understood, in the vague and deliberate way one understands the outer edges of a world one has chosen to stand beside rather than fully inside, that a debt of that magnitude, 20 years of trust broken, and a near assassination attempt against her, carried a cost that would be paid in full. She did not ask for details. Marco did not offer them. It was, she understood, one of the places where her world and his ran parallel without touching, and she let it remain that way. What she did witness was the restaurant slowly returning to its low murmur of conversation as Marco's men escorted Salvatore's 2 associates out a side entrance, the manager already moving through the room with quiet apologies and comped desserts. The entire violent interruption folding itself back into ordinary Tuesday night business, with an efficiency that told Nora this was not the first time this particular restaurant had absorbed something like this. Marco crossed the room to her once it was done, his hands, she noticed, still perfectly steady, though something in his eyes had not settled the way the rest of the room had. You could have stayed by the kitchen, he said. I could have, Nora agreed. But you needed someone to watch the exit, and the exit was about to walk out the back with a gun in his hand, so... So you threw a tray of water glasses at an armed man. It worked, didn't it? The almost smile that had haunted the corners of his mouth for weeks finally arrived in full, brief and startling and entirely unguarded, the first time Nora had seen it reach his eyes, and it changed his whole face in a way that made something in her chest ache with a feeling she had been refusing to name for 6 weeks. It worked, he agreed. They stood there for a long moment, in a restaurant that had nearly become a crime scene, surrounded by the low hum of other people's ordinary conversations, and Nora understood that this was the moment, the one the last 6 weeks had been building toward without either of them saying it directly. I'm not going to apologize for what I am, Marco said quietly. I'm not going to pretend tonight was an aberration. This is my life. It will always carry this in it. I know what you are, Nora said. I've known for 14 months. I just didn't know what it would feel like to matter to you inside of it. You matter to me, he said, and the words, delivered without decoration, without the performance a lesser man might have needed to make them land, hit her harder than any declaration wrapped in poetry could have. More than is safe for either of us. I decided 6 weeks ago I didn't care. Nora reached up, not dramatically, simply, and pressed her palm flat against his chest, feeling his heartbeat there, steady, but not as steady as his composure suggested, and he did not step back from the contact, did not do anything but cover her hand with his own, his signet ring cool against her skin. I'm not afraid of what you are, she said. I'm afraid of what it cost you to let someone in, but you did it anyway, so I'm staying anyway. He kissed her then, in the middle of a restaurant still smelling faintly of spilled water and adrenaline, unhurried despite everything that had just happened, his hand coming up to frame her jaw with a gentleness that felt like the direct opposite of the violence she had just watched him execute with the same hands. It was not a claiming born of danger passing. It was a choice, made in full clarity by 2 people who understood exactly what they were choosing and chose it regardless. 3 weeks later, Nora still cleaned the top 3 floors of the Vitale Group tower, though her badge now read a different title, one that gave her authority over building security protocols instead of a mop and cart. A promotion Marco had insisted on, and she had negotiated up from what he initially offered, because she was not going to be handed anything she hadn't first proven she deserved. She still took the north stairwell over the elevator most days, old habits, and she still noticed everything, though now people noticed her noticing, which changed the texture of the work but not its essential nature. Marco met her most evenings at the elevator bank on the 40th floor, a small ritual neither of them had planned and both of them protected fiercely. And on the evening this story ends, he was waiting there when she stepped off the north stairwell, his jacket already off, his tie loosened in a way that would have looked careless on any other man, and looked, on him, like the only unguarded moment of his entire day. 10 models, he said, as she crossed the floor toward him, and I remember exactly none of their names. You remember mine? I remembered yours before I had a reason to, he said. That was the problem, or the answer. I still haven't decided which. Nora stopped in front of him, close enough to smell the cedar note beneath his cologne, the same note she had noticed the very first day and told herself meant nothing. Maybe it's both, she said. Marco looked at her for a long moment. The city spread out gold and endless behind him through the window, and something in his face settled into a certainty that did not need further words to explain itself. Maybe it is, he agreed, and took her hand, and neither of them let go.